Good morning, good afternoon, good night. Good night. I mean, we are having today a special event because we are in very three different time zones. Welcome Srijan Sandeep Mandal and Peter Gray. I'm Jimena Perry, the host of IFPH Explorers. And today we have a very special event, at least for me, it's very interesting. It's called a bibliography for South Asian public history. I'm going to present the speakers today. We have Srijan Sandeep Mandal. He's a historian, keen on researching and teaching legal history, the philosophy of history, and public history. He's currently an assistant professor of history at the Nalsar University of Law, Hyderabad. Before joining Nalsar, he was on the faculty of the Center for Public History at the Srishti Manipal Institute of Art, Design and Technology, Bengaluru. He's also the secretary of the International Federation for Public History. He holds a PhD in history from the University of Hyderabad, where his doctoral thesis was awarded the University Annual Medal for the best PhD thesis in the discipline. Thank you, Srijan, for accepting our invitation. And we also have Peter Gray. Peter Gray is a student, recently graduated. Congratulations, and researcher in
Thank you.
ancient history, archaeology, global history, and recently public history. He has had a career as an educational planner, strategic analyst, and social researcher in the New South Wales and South Australian Public Services. He holds a BA in philosophy and psychology from the Flinders University of South Australia and recently completed a BA in ancient history from Macquarie University, Sydney. Now retired, he continues researching and writing in areas of historical interest. So, welcome. Thank you again for accepting our invitation, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Jimena, for inviting us and inviting me to talk about this because we have heard of the reach of IFPH Explorers and how important it is to the IFPH's mission. And it is great that we are able to use the platform that the Explorers provides to talk about another initiative that the International Federation for Public History has been working on and that I have been working on over the last year. And this is, as the title of the talk says, a bibliography for South Asian public history. So first is, first, the question that I want to begin with in the talk is why did I and did IFPH feel the need for an annotated bibliography on South Asian public history? And so for that, I unfortunately or fortunately, and beginning with a line from an article that I wrote with my former boss, Indira Chaudhary, who founded and directed the Center for Public History at my earlier institution, the Srishti Institute of Art, Design and Technology in Bangalore, which is in South India. And we had begun this article, which was published in Public History Review in the year 2017, with this line that almost nothing that would be recognized as public history elsewhere is identified as such in India. Right? And the reason we had begun with this line is because we realized, and Indira had realized because she had been working as the founder of the Center for Public History for 7 years now, 7 years then, and had been working as a public historian even before then. And I had joined the center only a year earlier, but even I had very quickly discovered this, that it is not that there isn't a practice of public history in India. And what we later learned was that this is applicable to other countries of South Asia as well. That it is not that there is no practice of public history. It is just that there is no recognition that there is such a thing as public history, that there is a discipline called public history, that there's a concept called public history, which can be used to describe these sorts of initiatives that have taken place across the board in South Asia, specifically in India. This recognition was in some ways confirmed when we also tried to begin, unsuccessfully, unfortunately, a master's program in public history. So one thing to know about, say, public history in India specifically, and maybe even South Asia broadly, is that there are no graduate level or undergraduate programs in public history in the region. There just isn't. The Center for Public History was, I believe, the first one to try to offer a full-time program at the master's level in public history. And unfortunately, that experiment didn't quite succeed because we were never able to attract the number of students that we needed. And at that time, we also discovered that one of the biggest challenges that an instructor, an institution, a department might face if they are looking at something like public history to be introduced at the graduate or undergraduate level is, what do you teach? What are the courses that you design? And how do you go about designing these courses? And what are some of the readings that you can actually introduce students to so that they have a sense of not just the practice of public history in India or in South Asia, but have also a sense of what the scholarship has been on the discipline and on the practice of the discipline in the region. So that was an absence that we acutely felt. Now, one might very well argue that why do you even need to bother with something like recognition within the umbrella of public history? Since there is, as I've said, already practice that can be considered public history in South Asia, in India, already going on and going on rather well, why need we bother with something like a label, especially a label that does not originate in South Asia, but comes primarily from the United States and from the 1970s? And again, to quote from that very same article in which we were trying to provide a lay of the land of public history in India, what we pointed out and what we advocated and argued for is that recognition of these practices as public history brings with it a formalization of practice, which allows for a sharing of the practice through recognized platforms and the coming together of practitioners under a common banner. And this has concrete consequences. This allows for funding to be attracted, because that is also a challenge, because without external funding or institutional funding readily available for public history projects, the practice of public history will also be scattered and will not really take off in any formal manner. And which in turn creates opportunities for employment. One of the biggest challenges that we had when we were trying to build the program was the question that all students, all interested students, and there were some, it's not that there were none, all interested students and their parents had this common question that what next after the student graduates? What sort of job opportunities do you provide? What sort of employment is there in this field of public history? And we felt that this is all connected, that only if you have employment opportunities, it makes the study of public history as a discipline and practice more attractive for students who may have otherwise become academic historians, but may not necessarily resonate with academic history. And the idea was that only through this almost cycle of having public history as a recognized field, having courses on public history, having programs on public history, having graduates in public history, having employed public history professionals, and having funding for projects on public history, all of them come together to bring the discipline to life in a context or in a region where it hasn't yet come to life in a formal, recognized manner, but only in terms of stray practices. That is what's going to provide, in some ways, a manner to achieve a larger social goal of public history, which is to have the past of communities, especially communities on the margins of society, represented authentically and ethically in a manner that has hitherto not been done. So that was an absence that I had come to recognize, thanks to Indira Chaudhary, thanks to the Center for Public History, and thanks to my own experience of working at the center on its faculty, that this is a problem, that we have a practice, we need to formalize this practice. And we need to create ways in which some education, some instruction, some training in public history could be provided. So one of the lessons that we learned from our own failure of, say, trying to get the public history master's program off the ground is that maybe a full-time program exclusively dedicated to public history might be a tall order to achieve in the very beginning. But a thing that can be attempted is for us to work with departments of history, to work with institutions that already offer undergraduate instruction in history or postgraduate instruction in history, and get them to think about introducing courses in their curriculum, which is on public history, which could be simply an introduction to public history or South Asian public history or oral history or something like that. That seemed far more feasible. And it's something that I became more acutely aware of when I was recruited or at least offered a position in the year 2022 at a university, a well known university with a thriving undergraduate program in history, which was interested in starting a concentration or a specialization, as it were, in public history. And they were looking to recruit someone who had experience of teaching public history and doing public history, that, hey, why don't you come in and design a few courses, both at the introductory level and at the advanced level, both at the mandatory type of course and at an elective type of course, so that students, graduates understand that, hey, public history is an option that is available for students. And that's something that they can actually avail of as a potential career option if academic history is not their thing. And again, although that is an opportunity that I could not take up, what it showed me the potential that this is a nice way of promoting the formalization of public history. But then again, based on my own experience of teaching public history, and we did have a couple of students who took the program and whom we did teach public history, was that if you're going to design a course on public history, you need readings, you need resources. And these readings and such resources are not readily available. Yes, of course, we can all trawl the internet as we all do and try to identify resources, but that is not always easy to come by. You may not have enough time, you may not have enough insight or knowledge, and you may not have a community with whom you can discuss the designing of such courses, discuss potential readings and resources, and therefore something like an annotated bibliography or a bibliography on public history in South Asia or public history scholarship in South Asia would be helpful. This need was further cemented for me, or rather, annotated bibliography or bibliography as a solution to this problem of how to encourage teachers, instructors, institutions, departments, programs to start courses on public history was when I joined my current institution, where I teach a course on legal history. And when I was first designing this course in the year 2022, I found this resource. And this is a resource called South Asian Legal History Resources, which has a comprehensive bibliography on South Asian legal history scholarship, curated by a renowned legal historian and lawyer named Mitra Sharafi at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And because of what she has achieved, which is that, and this is just one, and there are hundreds of resources, hundreds of texts that she has enumerated and she has worked on with all her colleagues to compile and curate. It gave me a sense that, hey, this is a really useful tool for an instructor like me trying to design my first course on legal history. And this is what made me realize that, yes, this was a problem that I experienced also when I was trying to teach courses on public history, but I did not have such a resource. And now that I have used such a resource, I've seen how useful such a resource can be. Maybe there's something like that that we can do for public history as well. Another example was this. This is an annotated bibliography on empire in Asia. This is a project of the National University of Singapore. And what it does, which say the legal history bibliography does not, is that it annotates each and every one of its entries. So for example, this is one of its, again, hundreds of entries in this bibliography. And what you see is that you see the book cover, you see the details of the book, you see the synopsis, and of course, I haven't been able to click the full thing. If you go, you see further, you see things like scope, you think things like argument. So the annotation is more than what the dust jacket of a book says. The annotation has been done by individuals who have gone through the book and have broken down the book in a manner that might be useful to scholars, to students, and teachers of Empire in Asia. So this two examples, but primarily the legal history bibliography on South Asia that Mitra Sharafi compiled and curated, gave me an idea that, hey, this is something that we could actually do for public history as well. But that was just an idea. And this is the year 2023. And then that idea starts to take form. And the idea starts to take form because of this student. This student's name is Rahul Pandey. He was then, when he emailed me in the year 2023, he was a second year student of the BALB 5-year integrated undergraduate program in law at the West Bengal National University of Juridical Sciences in Kolkata, which is in Eastern India. Now, Rahul had emailed me because he was looking for an online internship, and he was looking for a month-long internship, and he was looking for an internship that would entail some kind of research. And he had emailed me out of the blue. I knew nothing about him, and I had not heard of him before this. So he emails me out of the blue, and he tells me that he's interested in an online internship. Would I be willing to provide him with one? Now, at that time, I had, of course, no internship in mind. I had no project in mind. But I had already become part of, for at least a year then, a member of the steering committee of the International Federation for Public History. And the IFPH, of which Jimena is a member as well, Jimena is a member as well, is very open-minded in the kind of projects that it introduces, it allows its members to pursue. And it encourages its members to pursue, it encourages its members in the steering committee to pursue. So what I basically did was I proposed the idea to my colleagues on the steering committee of IFPH that, hey, there is a student who's willing to intern with me. I don't have a ready-made project at the moment, but I have been kicking around this idea of compiling and putting together an annotated bibliography on public history scholarship on South Asia. Would that be something that the IFPH would be willing to support, would be willing to host on their website? Because it's one thing to create an annotated bibliography, but the bibliography needs to also find a space. Right? The bibliography needs to be hosted somewhere. It needs to be so that there is a platform available for it and someone might encounter it. Otherwise, it's a useful exercise for me, but it's not an exercise that actually helps anyone else. Right? So there is this need that an IFPH really stepped in and they were very encouraging. All my colleagues in the steering committee, including Jimena and the president, Tanya Evans, they were very encouraging of this idea because the idea and the goal of the International Federation for Public History is to internationalize the public history movement and public history as a discipline. And one way of internationalizing this would be to bring recognition to myriad practices that can be called public history in regions outside the global north and have them be recognized as public history, have them be written about in scholarship, have them be theorized and spoken about so that the discipline also takes root in this region and something can come of it. Like the process that I've described, programs can be created, courses can be created, graduates can be produced, employment opportunities generated, and suddenly a different way of history emerges. So once I got the go-ahead from IFPH, from my colleagues on the steering committee, what I did was that I worked with Rahul and we worked for a month and we created the original sense of how is it that we will proceed with this. And the idea was that we will borrow from elements of both. We will borrow from what Mitra Sharafi's bibliography on legal history scholarship on South Asia does, which is that it has bibliographic entries and it has keywords. which allow for easier searches to take place for every single entry in the bibliography. And we will borrow from the annotation practice that the annotated bibliography of Empire in Asia does. Of course, because it was a new experiment and we didn't want to be too ambitious, the idea was that, okay, keywords and abstracts are usually available for both for journal articles, for book chapters, and even for books. So the idea would be that we will not necessarily create annotations of our own in the same way that the annotated bibliography on Empire in Asia is doing at the moment in the very first phase of the project. But what we will do is that we will compile it together. We will put together a list of resources, texts, specifically scholarly texts that we are able to identify that can be considered part of public history scholarship as it is globally understood. And we will put them all together in a compiled form. We will take the keywords that the publisher has already put out for these entries, and we will also borrow the abstract that they have put out, and we will collect all of them in a single document. So from that very first phase, what then started happening was that we initially decided that we will restrict ourselves to things that can be considered scholarship. So that was an important distinction. And I'll talk about it towards the end as well in terms of the future goals of the annotated bibliography. But in its very first phase, in its inception, the goal was to identify scholarly texts. Because, as I mentioned earlier, there is some practice of public history that is already happening in South Asia. What is required is not just the practice, but also scholarship on South Asian public history. Because in an institutional context, in a program setting, in a course setting, scholarly texts are key to the designing of courses, key to the instruction and training that students receive. So putting together a list of or a bibliography of scholarship on public history in South Asia was our key goal. So we then divided the bibliography into categories of scholarly texts. The journal article being the principal category. We all know that there are a number of journals that do publish scholarship on public history. And there are other journals which have published material, published article, which can be considered public history scholarship, but may not be consciously recognized as such even by the authors or the journals. So the idea was journal articles will constitute in some ways the majority, followed by, say, books or book chapters. And we were also open to having something like, say, blogs or articles, which may not necessarily be scholarly in the traditional sense of the word, but are informed by scholarship and the rigor that informs scholarship. So an example of this would be that the IFPH maintains a blog, the public historian maintains a blog, and there's the International Public History Journal also maintains. So there are these blogs that are available that are written by public history historians, public history scholars that can actually give you scholarly content without necessarily its length, footnotes, or that kind of structure. So that's why we wanted to also make space for blogs and other kinds of texts. So basically, we decided to divide the annotated bibliography into three: having journal articles, having book chapters, and have book chapters of books, and having blogs. And then the idea was that on a weekly basis, what we would do is that we would meet, Rahul and I, and this practice then continued also, where the idea was that he would identify texts that he believed could become part of public history scholarship, could become part of this bibliography. I would then look at them and we would have a discussion on why I think this could be part of the bibliography or why I think it should not be part of the bibliography. It was a learning exercise for both of us. In his case, he was exposed to public history for the first time, and in just trying to look for scholarship that can be considered public history, he was also clarifying his sense of what is public history. Similarly, even I was trying to create an almost not a formal definition, but an informal understanding of where I must draw the line of what constitutes public history and what does not. And if you were to press me on a definition, even now, I don't think I'll be able to offer a definition, because I think this was something that was quoted in the public historian website, on the public historian website, that public history is like obscenity. You know it when you see it. It's very difficult to define because it tends to elude comprehensive definition. So that's also not something that we attempted in the bibliography at all, which is why there might be texts that as a reader, you might disagree with as whether or not it can be considered public history. Some of it are on the border, some of it not. So after Rahul, then the reason why this project has reached this stage is because of Macquarie University, Sydney, and specifically Professor Tanya Evans and the internship program that they've created, where students of their undergraduate program are assigned to intern with, say, someone like me and on this project, because this is part of the IFPH. And then they work with me for almost a semester. And because they work with me for, I think, 15 weeks, where they are required to dedicate 5 hours each week, so that's 75 hours, that has truly turned a very small idea into the almost near complete version of the annotated bibliography that we have now. So I must therefore thank the 3 interns that I have had from Macquarie University: Piper Simpson, Peter Gray, and Henry Cohn. And you will hear from Peter in a bit. But say what Piper contributed to this project was that after Rahul had finished in a month, she was the one who, on a weekly basis, over 15 weeks, managed to put together a very sizable selection of texts that could become part of this annotated bibliography. And without her initiative, because when she started, there were not many texts there, there were about around 30. So because of her initiative and the internship work that she did, she managed to bring it to a level where we had, I think, almost crossed 100. So then the bibliography started to become a reality, because if it's a bibliography that will be made available to scholars, to practitioners, to students, to instructors in universities across the board, then it needs to have a substantive number so that people can pick and choose and they're not stuck with only that same set of texts. And then the last intern that I have at the moment, who's still working with me at the moment, is Henry. And Henry has been instrumental in putting together the sort of the final bits of preparing this annotated bibliography for publication. So this annotated bibliography has yet to be published, but it will be published very soon. And Henry has been working with me over the last few months, putting together the final touches. Because as you may remember, what I had mentioned was that we were borrowing the keywords and the abstract from the publisher's website and from the author, what the author had provided. But in dozens of texts, that was not necessarily the case. There was either no keywords, or there was no abstract, or there was none of both. So in those cases, Henry has, for instance, gone through each, and he has identified the keywords that he feels works for that particular piece of writing, and he has tried to put together an abstract. And that is what has allowed this bibliography to reach its completion. And so let me give you a sense of what this. So this is a typical entry. And this is an entry of an article that Indira Chaudhary, the person with whom I wrote that original article, which began this idea, from Public History Review last year. The reason why I picked in some ways Indira's article is because of 2 reasons. Indira is a pioneer in trying to bring public history to India, and not of my design and doing. Her work constitutes 11 entries in the bibliography. So she is the most cited person in the bibliography. So that's why I felt that I'll use her work as an example. So the idea is that there is a numbered text, and then you have the text cited according to the Chicago manual, and you have the link, the official publisher's link provided, so you can click on it and you can see if your institution has access to it or not, or then you can try to request access. The keywords are something that are not always there. In this case, some of the keywords were there in the article, the others have been put in. And then the abstract is something that was readily provided in this case, but it's not provided in another case. And this journal article is interesting because it's talking about a genre of hard copy books called the archival book that Indira created in the late 1990s and early 2000s to try to represent a creative way in which the archive could be visualized for the reader. And in this article, she describes how the archival book is a contribution to public history practice. And this article is in turn a contribution to public history scholarship. So where are we in terms of the stage of the project now? So we are, as you can see, there are at the moment, after almost more than a year, because we began last year in about August or September, we have 204 bibliographic entries in the annotated bibliography on public history scholarship about South Asia. This is a number that I hadn't honestly expected to hit, simply because when I was an instructor of public history and trying to teach courses on public history, I did not think there were so many resources on public history. Although we did try to put together a sufficiently comprehensive reading list, it did not reach 200 at all. And so to see that there are more than 200 potential pieces of scholarship, not just public history practice, of public history scholarship that can become part of this annotated bibliography is something that is truly unbelievable. And the thing that is even more unbelievable is that I don't think we've exhausted the resources on public history scholarship yet. I think as Henry at the moment is working on trying to look for other resources as well, and any future interns or any future assistants who work with me on this project will also try to do the same thing. They will try to go beyond what has been found to see if there is more. And turns out every time you look, there seems to be something more. Maybe the number of things that you find is less, but there is always something more to find. So this number is definitely going to increase. And this bibliography will definitely become more comprehensive as we go along. And like I had said, that there are 3 types of texts that are represented in this bibliography. And there are journal articles, which are 146 in number, 41, which constitutes the number of books and book chapters we have found, and 17, which constitutes the number of blogs and media articles. And like I had said, each and every one of these 204 bibliographic entries has been annotated with keywords and with the abstract, both of which are usually available from the publisher or the author. And if they are not, we work on it. We work on it and we provide it. But what is truly encouraging and something that we are proud of with this annotated bibliography is the fact that all the countries of South Asia are represented. So if you look at a definition of South Asia, these are the countries along with Maldives that is usually considered part of South Asia, although both Afghanistan and Maldives are a bit of a stretch. And I must admit, we haven't found public history scholarship on Maldives, but for every other country, we have found public history scholarship, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's Bangladesh, whether it's Bhutan, whether it's India, whether it's Nepal, whether it's Pakistan, whether it's Sri Lanka. There is public history scholarship, not just practice, public history scholarship produced on all of these countries that are part of the bibliography. And in a way that will not make you feel that India, by virtue of the fact that this project begins in India and I am from India, and I teach in India and I work in India, that India overtly dominates. I must admit that India represents the largest share, of course, of public history scholarship, but it's not the only thing. And I now want to introduce you to Peter Gray, who of all the 4 interns that have worked on this project, has made this most important, the most significant, and the most consequential contribution. If the bibliography has reached 204, it's because of his initiative. Because on a week in, week out basis, he was able to find more resources than I could think possible. And he was also committed to not just ensuring that there were a lot of resources week in, week out available for me to discuss with him, whether or not this can make it into the bibliography or not, but that they are sufficiently diverse. And he always would usually pick a weekly theme that in this week, this is what I'm going to look at. I'm going to look at maybe technology, or I'll look at Afghanistan, or I'll look at Pakistan, or I'll look at Bhutan, or I'll look at heritage management. So because of a very focused search that he was able to make incredible contributions to the bibliographic entries that this bibliography has. And what is more, is that he was able to also offer a comprehensive and insightful analysis of the bibliography in a way that I had not even envisioned. The idea was only to collect all of this and to make it available. The idea was not to really analyze its entries and to see what we have and what we don't have. But this is something that Peter brought to the table. He did it on his own steam, on his own initiative. And when I read what he had found, I was so impressed by what sort of insights it was able to generate, insights that I had not even thought of. And I don't think anyone had quite envisioned, which is why I have invited Peter to be part of this talk and to present the analysis that he did on this bibliography, which will actually allow you to understand what is it exactly beyond just the numbers that we have been able to put together in this annotated bibliography. So thank you, Peter. The floor is now yours.
Thank you.
You need to share, Peter.
I'll just
Okay.
Find the slides. Go to the slides. Yes, I'm not an expert at
Don't worry. But I made you co-host, so you should be able to share without a problem. But if you have a problem, let me know. There you go. What if you double click the file?
yes, I should be able to do that. Okay, let's see. It's okay. Is that
We are seeing it. I see it.
okay? All good. Fantastic. All right. Well, look, I must say that I uh, just regard it as a privilege to work on the project with Sri Jan, and I'm yeah. I thank you for your kind words. It was just one of the things that I thought when I began to look at the project was exactly what does public history look like in the South Asian context. And to start with, I thought, well, if I had a look at all the works that were on the annotated bibliography, and began to do a little bit of an analysis of them. So what I did was I took all the existing entries, put it onto an Excel spreadsheet, and then I classified it according to author, to the journal that it was published in, to the field of study that the article looked at. And so I just made a series of categories. And that gave me a pretty good idea of what exactly was on the annotated bibliography. And I used that information to then launch my searches on a weekly basis. So, so that was the genesis of it. And with each new article that was identified, I put that on the spreadsheet. And then I developed some other categories as well to analyse all the material. So what I want to do today is just give you a brief overview of the analysis that I conducted. So that should take me. Okay, can you see slide 1? Okay, all right. Well, slide 1 shows the percentage of entries by type of resource. As Srijan has already gone over that, but it's basically journal articles made up about 72% of the annotated bibliography, and with 20% on books, book chapters and reviews, and then 8% on blogs and general articles. And again, looking at percentage of entries by country or region of focus, as Srijan mentioned, the largest number, which is understandable, was from India. But we also had a representation from all the other nations in South Asia, and with Afghanistan 4%, Bangladesh 9%, Bhutan 3%, Pakistan 8%, Sri Lanka 8%, and then we also had Nepal, and there were a number of articles in which were jointly looking at India and Pakistan, others looking at Pakistan and Bangladesh, and then some which were just focused on the whole region. So we've got a fairly good coverage, I thought, of articles from around the region. Okay, well, slide 3 looks at the percentage of entries by field of study. And I classified the articles and the books into the various facets of public history. And as you can see, public history, oral history, cultural heritage are fairly well balanced, with about 25% of the resources on the bibliography. And the remaining 25% is made up of articles focusing on galleries, archives, libraries and museums. And then 10% was on digital heritage and history. And that seems to be an area that is really starting to expand. And I kept on finding more and more articles from that particular field of study. The slide 4 gives some idea of some of the most prolific authors that contributed to the annotated bibliography. Now, I must stress this isn't representative of everything that they do, because this is only the resources that we've been able to identify. So, and in total, there was about 230 people that have authored or co-authored works on the annotated bibliography. Okay, so what we have in this particular slide is looking at the various authors that contributed the most articles. And of course, Indira Chowdhury, she's the most prolific writer on the subject. So the slide will show you some of the areas of research that the various authors are focused on, and the country of focus of their research. So in total, there's about 60 works contributed by those researchers. In slide 5, we looked at the most frequent keywords that we used in the bibliography and the top 10 keyword categories. Now, not as Srijan mentioned, not every book and article on the annotated bibliography provided keywords, but of the 156 or so, these are the main categories. Of course, the largest number were words relating to the national focus of the article, either India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, etc. The next largest category was that of words relating to culture or cultural. Again, as history and historical, yes, we would expect that. Heritage was another large category. And then there was quite a few studies, and this is understandable, that relate to the partition of India and Pakistan, and also the wars of liberation in the region. Then you have keywords, museums. Again, you have oral, as in oral history. Memory, memorial, and memorialization also had a large category. And then there were words related to war, conflict, violence. And then the other large category was post-colonialism, colonialism. So that gives you a bit of a flavour of the keywords people are using to identify their works. Well, and this particular slide is I think is the most exciting. What I was able to do was to have a look at when the entries were published, or the works were published. And I looked at 5-yearly intervals, starting out from 1995 to 1999, and then finishing up with 2020 to 24 as of May of that year. So that's not the whole year, it's only the half year. I think what really stands out to me is that if you look at the graph, it just keeps on growing. And what just a few statistics from that. 87% were published between 2015 and May 2024. 70% of works in the bibliography were published between 2015 and May 24, so the last decade. But the highest number of entries, over 41%, were published in the 3-year period between 2020 and May 2024. The more that we search, the more that we're finding. And the publications that are there are relatively recent. The bulk of the publications are relatively recent. So what I found with searches is the more that you looked, the more that you'd find. But I was surprised by the number of recent publications being identified, and it only makes me wonder in future how much more we can expand that. I expect that eventually it will double that. So that's all good news. And just finally, I did an analysis of the journals, the category of the journal article, and the types of journals. Now, I won't go through them all now because you'll be able to see that on the website when it comes out. But what stands out is that really articles on public history can be found across a wide range of journal types. So, for instance, with public history, you can find articles, public history journals, South Asian studies and regional studies, humanities, international studies journals, and social sciences journals. And so there's a very wide range of sources for articles on public history in South Asia. So that's just a very, very brief overview of the analysis that I did. And as I said, when it comes when it's published on the website, you'll be able to see a lot more of the details. So thank you very much. That concludes my part of the presentation.
Thank you so much, Peter. It was lovely to see you talk about stuff that you've now written about, and like I mentioned, that when I first saw this, I was like, okay, wow. I firstly did not know that one could analyze the bibliography. I understand that bibliometric analysis is a thing, but I didn't know that one could do this on this annotated bibliography, and that will yield so much insights and so many promising directions for how to continue this. And like Peter mentioned, a particular point of pride was the fact that so much of the scholarship is so recent. And this could be indicative of one of two things. It could be simply the bias of the search itself, that because we are searching for these resources online, and many of these resources would be more easily available online if they're published recently. But it could also be indicative of the fact that public history scholarship on South Asia is growing. Like I had said, public history practice had already existed, as we had found when we had written about it. But here was evidence to suggest that there might also be a corresponding increase in public history scholarship on South Asia. which means that, and given the fact that India, the other point of pride I would say is the fact that India constitutes less than 48% of entries in the annotated bibliography. And one can usually quite legitimately say that India usually plays big brother when it comes to South Asia. And South Asia, in many cases, tends to be simply synonymous with India. So thanks to Peter and the effort of other interns, namely Piper and Rahul, we were able to avert that. We were able to avert again an overt domination of India and scholarship that emerges on India, about India, from India in this annotated bibliography. But what it has, but because of the fact that we have been able to find enough scholarship across South Asia, and we have been able to find scholarship that's so recent, I think it is evidence of a critical mass where there is now sufficient practice of public history in South Asia. There is now quite a bit of scholarship on public history in South Asia. What needs to happen next is that these two need to come together and translate into formal academic instruction on public history in South Asia, so that the practice and the scholarship can be formalized into discipline, and that discipline can be provided through training, and that can then actually create a more consistent source and cohort of public history graduates and public history practitioners that can help seed the discipline further in this region, and can also contribute to global discussions about public history, which have historically been and understandably dominated by the American and European Academy, the Global North Academy. And here is an opportunity, and the bibliography is one way of doing it, for us to contribute to that discussion, and for us to remain true to our context, and for us to train interested students in public history in India and other countries of South Asia. So what is the future plan? And with this, I will end. The plan is that this will be published over the next month or two before the end of the year on the website of the International Federation for Public History. The IFPH website already has a tab called Resources, where there is already some resources available on public history, especially in the European context. So this adds to that literature. This adds to the goal of IFPH in internationalizing. And even Jimena has been working on an annotated bibliography of Latin American public history scholarship. So that will add yet another dimension, yet another voice from the global South to the global public history conversation. The next idea would be to keep at it with this project. The hope is that we will have interns as enthusiastic and insightful like Peter working on this project, so that we can, as he mentioned, keep searching more, keep searching further, and keep growing the bibliography. The idea being, just as the first version or the first edition of the bibliography is going to be published at the end of 2024, we will publish another edition at the end of 2025, which would be the second edition, and so on and so forth. So the idea would be that we would annually, till we can figure out a more responsive system, we would annually keep updating the bibliography with the latest scholarship on South Asian public history. And so that whoever accesses it, whether it's a student, whether it's a scholar, a practitioner, or an instructor, they are getting the latest that public history scholarship has to offer for those in South Asia and interested in South Asia. And finally, and this is an idea that comes from, again, Jimena's work on Latin American public history scholarship, is that we might consider diversifying the resources or the sources that go into the bibliography. As I'd mentioned, initially the goal was to focus on public history scholarship. That is to say, principally texts such as journal articles, book chapters, books, and blog articles. Now the idea might be that once we feel that we have reached a certain, not necessarily exhausted the resources, but explored most of it that's out there and easily available, we might want to diversify by including, say, things like podcasts, YouTube videos, radio programs, maybe plays, films, things, documentaries, which can all be described as and understood as examples of public history scholarship becoming part of this annotated bibliography, which has hitherto been exclusively about scholarship and not only about practice. And so these are the plans that we have. And we hope and we pray that once this goes live on the IFPH website by the end of the year, some teacher, some student, some scholar, some practitioner in South Asia and beyond chances upon it. And as a result, it encourages them to maybe come put together a course on public history in South Asia. And maybe that course and a critical mass of such courses can create incentive for programs in South Asia. So what we were unable to do at the Center for Public History, some other institution might be able to do by actually creating a sustainable and viable program in public history, which can consistently produce graduates of public history and can help build the discipline further. So thank you so much for listening. It was a pleasure and an honor for Peter and I to speak at the IFPH Explorers Forum. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Srijana and Peter. This was really, really, it's really amazing. I was really into it the whole time, and also the detailed work you have done has also made me think about the one from Latin America. Perhaps at some point we can compare efforts and perhaps complement each other work, but I mean that's another thing.
Yes, of
But I
course.
have two questions. I have two
Yes.
questions for you. The first one is, what about language? This is going to be only in English, or at some point other languages are going to be included? And I have the same question for me related to Spanish. I haven't figured out that out, so I want to hear what's your opinion on that. And the other one is, hearing you speak, Srijan, have you ever considered, or at some point you would think, that's also a question for myself. I know there's a lot of projects in South Asia. Well, I know a few, not a lot. I know a few that are very grassroots projects going on related to public history. Um, I don't know if they fit in the scholarly, because they are just projects, ongoing stuff. They have their own ways of promotion and stuff. Are they going to be considered included at some point in the bibliography, or at some point, I don't know, called like social justice or activism? And I'm thinking the same for me. So I want to know your takes on that. What have you thought about that?
So, to be honest, I have not yet considered either the language question or the other public history projects that you've talked about. Because, like I said, the initial goal is to try to encourage or create a resource for instructors or students interested in courses on public history. Because there are no courses on public history, I feel that the discipline is not really taking any root in the country. And unfortunately, the language of scholarship in South Asia is English. It is a legacy of colonialism. You go to most universities in South Asia, they will have English as the language of instruction. English is the not just the dominant, I would say that it's the exclusive language of scholarship in South Asia, on South Asia, by South Asians. And I know of an initiative at a center for the study of developing societies in New Delhi, which is the capital of India, which is trying and has created a journal in Hindi. Hindi is one of the two official languages of India. The idea being that it will be an academic journal, will have the same rigor as, say, an English language journal, but it will be published in Hindi. So there are some initiatives of this kind, but those are few and far between. And at the moment, given that I haven't or we haven't yet exhausted everything that's available in the English language on South Asian public history scholarship, I don't think I'll be able to or will be able to diversify it to other languages. But once I think we have this in place and we know that we understand what's happening year in, year out, maybe in a future phase of the project, we might consider things like, firstly, translating the bibliography itself into other languages so that you need not have English as a language to be able to access it. And secondly, and more importantly, to look for languages or resources in other languages? Because the mechanism of how to do that would also have to be figured out, because a Bengali language publication or a Hindi language publication or a Urdu language publication, how do we find these things? That is a challenge that has yet to be met, which honestly I haven't yet figured out. And to your second question, you're absolutely right. There are, I think, you had hosted an earlier talk with Maya Dodd and Aparna Vedic, and the project that they are working on, which is actually trying to make sense of all public history initiatives in South Asia, in India specifically. They have looked at a lot of grassroots projects, and there are many grassroots projects that will not be written about in a scholarly fashion, and that will not be considered public history even by the practitioners, because they have different agendas. As in, they are maybe trying to solve a particular local problem or being an activist initiative, and it just happens to coincide with public history, but it's not meant to be public history in that sense. So I think the idea there would be, again, that in a later phase, just as I mentioned, that thanks to what you are doing in the Latin American context, if we can include other resources and not just scholarly texts, we might be able to figure out a way as to how such grassroots initiatives can also be included as a resource. Fundamentally, the idea would still be that this annotated bibliography is a resource for educators and students. That's, I think, would still remain the goal. But the idea would be to also make educators and students aware of the kinds of initiatives that are happening that may not be part of published formal scholarship. And so the hope would be that maybe in the third edition, because I think once this goes out, we will need yet another year just to see, have we really exhausted all of it that we can find online using the methods that we have, or is there more? Once I think by the second edition, we will have, I think, pretty much exhausted what can be found. And then on an annual basis, there will only be a marginal addition. So once we reach that stage, if it's not in the second edition, maybe it's in the third edition or in the later editions, then I think we'll have to figure out how to include these very interesting, very important, very urgent public history initiatives, thinking of it as being a resource for educators and students. And again, that is not something that I have yet thought about, but I feel that maybe in a future edition, probably third or fourth, this is something that we'll have to look at very seriously. And then conversations about the ethics of it, how to represent it, how to make it accessible and meaningful without it being exploited. All of those things would also have to be considered. But that is, at the moment, a future, not the present of this project.
Yes, I understand, because hearing you both speak, this is just like the beginning of a very long and big project.
Yes.
As Peter was mentioning, and you also, Srijan, the more you dig, the more you find.
Yeah.
So this is not, I mean, I just see it as like the beginning of a huge project, which is very, very interesting. So all of those considerations also made me think about the one for Latin America. It's the same thing. It has to be a long thing, many versions. It's really very interesting. I find it very interesting, and you say that the hope is that it's going to be used. I'm sure it's going to be used by a lot of people, because it's it's a very it's a novelty. I think it's like kind of a unique project. So congratulations. Before ending, is there anything else you want to add or to invite people to consider about your project?
Only thing that I would like to add, and if Peter, you have something to add, please do so, is that in the annotated bibliography that is published, as Peter mentioned, this analysis will also be there. And what we'll also do is that we will provide an email address where, if you feel that there is something that can be part of this bibliography but wasn't there, please write to us. Because as you've seen, this is a project that has primarily been put together, which is why even the slide that I've shown, it says prepared by Peter, by Piper, by Henry, and by Rahul. I have only supervised the process, right? So just as four individuals coming together have been able to put together so much, if any reader who, if you are watching this and if you encounter this and if you find this useful, if you have resources that you are aware of but which we are not aware of, please let us know. Because this has to be a collective endeavor beyond the people that we can formally work with. And the more people who participate in it, the more democratic this bibliography will become, and the more useful and more meaningful it will become to anyone who's interested in public history in South Asia. So that is my only plea, that please do use it and please do suggest ways in which we can make it more inclusive and comprehensive.
Peter, would you like to add something?
Oh, look, just to reinforce the more you look, the more that you find. And it seems like there's a much greater interest in publishing materials on public history. So I think the future is bright.
Yeah, it's bright and full of many interesting possibilities. Thank you very much, Srijan and Peter, for accepting the IFPH Explorers invitation. This was really, for me, it was very inspiring. It's a huge project. It it shows that you have done tons of work. So my hope is to see it published like very soon. Perhaps you can also add like a small writing piece to publish in the blog so we can also spread in all our social media. And thank you very much. Thank you very much for being here. I hope to see you in a year to see how this has been, how it
Yeah.
developed, and your impressions, and if you have any feedback after a year.
Thank you so much for inviting us. Thank you so much for allowing us the platform of the explorers to talk about this, because this is the first time that we are publicly speaking about this, and we are inviting people to take a look at this once it's published, which will be very, very soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.